Hello and welcome back, this is ProTaleDev, back with another breakdown video of a game jam that I recently took part in. So this was the Lame Jam 2, and the game that I created for it was the Monstrous Descent. We're going to go through everything that I did, just as I've done in the past. We're just going to break down everything step by step, and I'll show you the different things I did. So, first of all, hopefully you've seen the gameplay, but I'll show that in a second, what this game was all about now. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about the planning, because this game jam was meant to be the lame jam, which is something you do when you don't really feel like doing much. I did this game jam just after having a vaccination, so for COVID, so I felt a little bit not 100%. So this was a few days after, and I wasn't feeling great and full of energy, so I wanted to take it easy. However, as you see me playing this game, you'll notice that there's a lot of effort put in, and the reason for that is because I got so into the idea of it that I wanted to go all the way, and I really wanted to do as much as I could to really bring this into fruition, this idea that I had. And it just got bigger and bigger until the game jam ended. So the game jam was 48 hours. I believe it was 72 hours initially, or something like that. But I ended up only doing it for 48 hours. And this game was meant to just be a chill game, but it ended up being so much more. So the planning stages was built around the idea of you would just be a monster that traveled around a world and just ate people. Really simple concept, there wasn't going to be much to it. Of course, it just kind of escalated a little bit more to something a bit different. So initially the world was actually just going to be a 2D world, and it was just going to be you going around it on an X and Y axis, so just looping around, rotating around a single point. That would have been really easy to do and simple, but I felt like I could do a little bit better. And I wanted to go for a 3D game, because I do a lot of 2D games, I don't do a lot of 3D games. And I really wanted to play around with low poly objects and use Blender again, just for fun. So I ended up going for a 3D environment. So this was a change of plan, obviously, from what I was initially going for. The idea was that initially on this 2D environment, you would loop around chasing after enemies, and depending on which way you would go would change the speed of your victims that you're trying to chase. It was as simple as, it wasn't thought out too much, because in the end I ended up changing it, but then I went for a 3D environment and it completely changed. So I'm going to show the gameplay off first, and then I'll talk about it as I'm playing. The first thing you'll see is this menu. I went over the top with the menu. It looks slightly different to if you played the actual game jam. This is because this title and these planets were added. These two planets were added, which is the extra levels. I decided to just add them into the menu. I might re-upload this just to give the updated version. However, just know that the current version that's on itch.io doesn't have this title and the two planets. Everything else is the same though. This is just something I added a little bit extra to kind of finish it off. So you notice immediately that you can see, obviously you've got the title, you've got this menacing monster, which is what you're going to be playing as. Looking over this planet, which is the first planet you play, you actually unlock, so the first level that you play. And you'll notice straight away I've got the credits, so you've got me and a couple of references to the music that's played in the background. And then you've got the controls, which is really simple. It's WASD, mouse to E, and just space and pause is Q. So, and then we have the different levels. So this was the first thing that initially wasn't in the plans, but I decided to go with it, and that is score. Just give it a bit more replayability and to try and add up something, just to add a little bit more to it. So the score was something that I didn't have planned, but I ended up adding for that very reason, for replayability. Again, it wasn't necessary for this type of game jam, but I went with it anyway. So let's go into the first level. So immediately you notice that I've got sounds, which is really quite unique. Let's actually go into max on play. So let's go into our first level again. So you'll notice immediately that we've got a few things going on here. We have counter on the left, at the top left, which is our victims counter and detections. We also have our health, our hunger. We have our monster in the center, which you play as, which is moving around. We also have every now and again a icon that comes up with eat them, which is an icon if you remember from Turtle Trial. I just reused that since it was my own asset. You'll notice these lights going around the planets as well, and these are your detections. And you'll also notice that you have these little creatures running around, which are your victims. So if we come over here and then eat one, it'll play a little animation which will then eat the character, and you'll notice we've now got victim. Our counter has now gone up to 1. So this is our general score of the game, and it's just as simple as how it looks. You travel around the planet, you eat these victims, you get score. You have to avoid the detections because the detections will harm you. Let me show you. If I just come over here, you'll notice my health will go down. You'll also see that if we go into the water, our health will also go down, but a little bit slower. And we can also jump. We can pause it, and we can also, like we just did, eat creatures and basically get victims. So there's not much more to it. Most of the time I actually spent was for the models. So if we just like eat a couple of people here, you'll notice again I really spent a lot more time on animation this game jam. So in previous game jams animation is always the thing I leave. So I have the least amount of experience in creating animations, and so this means that I'm just not as good with animations, and I really wanted to play around with it in this game jam. In fact, this game jam, one of the initial plan ideas was to go for a game solely based on the rig of a single enemy, the monster. So it would be a single point, and then the rig would just expand and go all over the place. So the body would be essentially a game that you got to avoid. This was one of the other ideas I had. So essentially the monster would be at the center, it would have like these tentacles coming out, and you just got to avoid them. So that was the other game idea that I went with. I'm explaining this now because I ended up bringing this same idea into my character creation for the monster in Blender. We'll go over Blender in a minute, but I just want to talk a little bit more about these trees. So these trees that I've added in are if you recognize them, they're from the Corrupting Spring game jam that I did. And when I created those, I decided to just reuse that asset, of course, because it just saved a bit of time. We also have a few other things in here. So the lights are just simple. If we can just do this. And I'll just show you now. So the lights are just around these planets. They're just colliders, and all these do is just when they hit the enemy and collide with them, you'll just take damage. It's really simple and straightforward. Currently we have our victims running around our planet. So if I quickly that's our planet. If I quickly show you, so these are our lights. Each individual one is actually rotating around a center point. This center point is just literally going around the planet. So if we move this in any direction, we can see that the lights will always stay in that center point, just rotating around. And the variation determining what determines the speed is this script, the continuous rotation. Now we have something similar on the victims. So I spent a very long time when I was doing coding for this game just trying to get the code right for victims, because initially I wanted the characters to be able to run freely around, but the physics of the game made it a little bit difficult to be able to control them and use them in the way that I wanted. So I ended up just having the same thing, having a center point, but a much more advanced version of the continual rotation. All this does is it keeps them rotating around a specific point, while they have another script running on the individual victims, which actually keeps them at center points. So we have a gravity, essentially. So another big part of this game was the gravity around the planet. So as you'll notice, as you just saw then when we're playing, is the world actually isn't rotating. The world is actually staying completely still. What's actually rotating is the monster. Oh, actually, I think I just run out of hunger then. What's actually happening, oh that was health, is I'm actually rotating around the actual planet itself. The planet isn't rotating with me. This made things a little bit more interesting. If I just rotate the planet, you won't see the same effects on the victims and on the monster as you do now. So literally all that's happening is the monster is actually staying and rotating around this planet, while the planet is actually standing completely still and the victims are actually the same. This means that our directional light is also staying on this side, while this dark side is on the opposite side of the planet. This gives that little bit of a lighting effect, and I didn't need to code the lighting as much as I didn't need to code the lighting at all, essentially. Apart from obviously the spotlights, which got a little bit of code, everything else I didn't need to do. Initially, the idea was that victims would go and hide in the dark. So this was an idea that I wanted to add on to this game, but I decided since this is a lame jam and I'd already done quite a lot of other stuff at this point, this was getting a little bit later in the jam, I didn't want to kind of add on any more mechanics. But the idea was that victims would run to the dark side for shelter, and it would be harder for the monster to see, but and so it would be difficult for them to catch. However, it would also mean that I was going to make it so that victims would provide more hunger in this area. However, if you go on the light side, you would take more damage, but it would be easier to see the victims, so it would be a give and take kind of situation. It was an interesting idea, but it really would have added a little bit more time necessary to code it, and again, I didn't start this until a little bit late. I basically missed an entire day of development and then just jumped into it, so I ended up scrapping that idea. So again, the hunger and the health are really simple systems. I've shown them off in previous game jams. It's just a variable ticking down every time we collide with something. So if we collide with the water, which is set as a tag of border, then we'll take damage. If we hit the light, we'll take damage. And hunger is slowly draining every few seconds. It's constantly draining, but when we eat, like this guy, if we eat, it should go back up. Oh, we died before we could eat. So if we just do this, eat this guy, the second he dies, the hunger should just jump straight up, which it does. So, what about the counter and how the scoring works? Well, the scoring, let's just pause there. It's really simple and easily calculated. It's just times it by a certain amount, and then it takes it off, and then the detections take off the overall score. So if we just activate this endpoint, which only activates when you earn 10 victims. So once you've earned 10 victims, you can end the level. However, ending the level will bring you out of the back to the main menu, or it'll bring you to the next level, and what will happen is that you will save the score to the main menu. However, you can have a choice actually. So if I activate the endpoint now and unpause it, we've actually got the endpoint here. Now if I run into this, it'll save my score, bring up a menu which will allow me to either continue, or it'll allow me to essentially save the score and come out. If I die while trying to continue, so if I show you this now, I need my character to be 10 victims. So let's give ourselves 10 victims. Okay. What will happen is once you've got 10 victims, it'll come up here. Level can be completed at yellow beam, and then it'll save your score if you end, or you can continue and risk it. If you die though, you will lose your score. So here we go. We've got our paused menu, and we've got the victims, detections, and our current score. Now we can either go to the next level, or we can resume the current one. Now let's say we resume the current one. What we can do here is we can just carry on, get more score. Let's say I'm just skipping ahead a little bit, but basically let's put our score to 21. So we got 21 victims and then a few more detections. Let's now run to the end zone, and let's say we want to go to the next level. Well, now our score is 63, and if we go to the next level, what will happen is the score will save. So now we're on a different level. It's pretty much the same thing, except there's less victims, they're slightly quicker and can change variation in speed, and it's overall much, our hunger will drain slightly quicker, very slightly, but overall it's just less victims, and the spawning rate of them is a little bit slower. And it's the same thing for the last level, the third level, which is the hardest level. Now, if we say that we want to come out of here, let's just add an extra score to this one as well and do the same thing. So if we just go to our player again and then just add another, I don't know, 100. Let's add 100 on, just for something crazy. As you can see, when we hit 100, we would now right next to the yellow beam, and so it's ended it, and this is our score 300. So let's say that we want to quit. So if we can we can quit to go to the main menu. Now if we select level, we can see our scores. So this is our overall score so far, and this allows players to try and beat it. Obviously the final level is just another variation. They're all the same worlds, just different colours. Again, just to save a little bit of time. I wanted to add more worlds, but just ran out of time. And also the detections, on this final level the detection will do a lot more damage. So we can also pause the game as you just saw before, and we can come out. Let's look at the code now. So again, our player does have a few different scripts on them. There is music playing as well, and there's a little bit of sounds. I'm not sure you can hear it, but there is sound effects. Hopefully the music isn't drowning it out too much. But let's quickly go to our player. Why am I? I need to go back to, here we go. So on our player we have our gravity, we also have our player script, our controller, we have our capsule and a few other scripts, so for hunger, for health, and our player score. What is most important though is most likely the gravity, what's rotating around. So the gravity was really difficult to code in, and I ended up doing different types of scripts. One of them was just rotating the planet, of course, as I mentioned before. I was going to go with it, but it didn't feel right. Another one was to try and have the player follow a specific point, but the problem was it would break certain movements for the rigid body, so having a script that just forces the player to follow didn't work. The other thing was to essentially rotate the player around a specific, the entire planet, and essentially getting rid of the rigid body, not the rigid body, the different parts of the physics and freeze and everything. It didn't really work as well as I hoped, but I did use the freeze rotation and a few other bits and pieces. All we're doing is rotating around the whole object. Now we have a gravity body and gravity attractor. I got a bit of inspiration from online, of course, because I'd never done something like this type of code before. I mean, in just the general idea, I needed some kind of inspiration. So I ended up going to different places and different forums, but ultimately I decided on writing my own code a little bit more based on some of that I've seen. I can't remember which Reddit thread I read, but it had something like this. And then kind of adapted it slightly to change some of the forces and stuff like that. But all we're doing is rotating around the planet based on a calculation and determining what the gravity is that's pulling us towards the planet, as well as our movement to counteract with it. This all works very well, and the most of the code is actually, I think the biggest amount of code is in here. This is just determining how close we are to victims when we can actually click and attack, and different controls like jump, determining where the ground is and things like that. Again, things I've covered previously in other game jams. We've got our general movement that's being calculated, and this also calculates the rotation of our monster. So we also have our close victim, which is a script that calculates what the closest victim is, just as it sounds, so that we can find where he is and then obviously determine if we can click on him or not. We have a few other things, a continuous rotation for our lights and for our individual victims, as well as our hunger, our health. We have our menu, and of course player scoring, which determines that depending on what level we're on, we'll save what score. And this is just the save and load score that we've got for Unity that I've used for a very long time. I used it for the Turtle Trial and lots of other different saving. It's not the greatest saving script, but it's not the best saving code, but it's what I always go with, so it's what I'm used to, so that's what I went with. After that, there's not much more to the code. Really, it was all about Blender. So now we're going to move on to the Blender, and actually before I do that, so that I don't have to come back to Unity and so that I can end it, I want to quickly just focus on the player. So you'll notice immediately that everything is animated. So if I just quickly go to my monster, you'll see that this is our animation, and I spent a long time just trying to animate it to twist and break and distort. And to really move, obviously you've got the eye that actually moves on its own and stays with the tentacle. It breaks around. You have the mouth in the center that's rotating. So the eye, the mouth, and the main body are all separate objects so that I could animate them. This took quite a lot of time to animate ultimately, but it was very, very worth it. It really, really distorts and looks horrible, and it's exactly what I wanted. We also have our victims, so let's quickly go to, I think it'll be in our prefabs. Another thing is I also use polybrush for certain colorings on the planets because certain things didn't color right, and that just added to it. I didn't really do much else, I didn't edit any scenery. That is also how I added the trees onto this as well, because it automatically rotates them to a surface if you choose that on polybrush. So that's how I managed to put the trees down on this, and I painted little bits and pieces every now and then that I didn't paint in Blender when I missed them. So going back to our prefabs, obviously we have our trees that we imported, like I said, from Corrupting Spring. We also have our blood splat, like our spray that comes out. That was just a simple particle system that only fires once. But we also have our victim. So here we go. So let's find our animation. I believe it's on here. Yep. Let's go to him. And this was our other character that I created in Blender. And what he does is he walks and moves. Very, very simple. And this was the other animation that I worked on. So it's really, really simple, but I think it adds to the scene a little bit more, makes them a bit more lively rather than just T-posing. And that was the last thing I wanted to show you. So this is the game overall. It's quite nice, it's quite fun, and I really, really like it. Okay, so going back to Blender. So Blender is the program that I use to create all of our little poly objects, obviously because it's free. I have the trees and everything from Corrupted Spring were made with Blender, and so I have a little bit more experience with Blender. However, like I mentioned before, animation and making objects for Blender is something I usually do last or do for very little amount of time. Corrupted Spring was really my big introduction to Blender because in previous times, even though I'd used it, I hadn't gone fully into it. I have used a lot of Maya though, back when I was at uni, so I was really eager to try this. So this was the monster that I created, and you'll immediately notice that this does have a rig. So if I go into object mode and I go into layer, I'm a bit conscious about how long this video is, but for now let's just quickly show this. You'll immediately notice that we do have our character and we have all of our rigid body pieces. They're all in here. So we have, and I have named them all this time. Unlike a previous Corrupted Spring object, I have named these. What I can do now is I can just show you that things are rigged. Again, eye is separate to the rest of the body, but each part is actually rigged, and we can actually move different parts of the body. It's not great, but again, it was meant to have this like demorph effect to it, which I think really does show. So if we look at the legs, there's different parts of the leg for the rig. If we just go into wireframe, you can see our rig overall. And what it is if I just go back a second and just set this back to normal, you'll see that our rig is set up in this fashion. So the very center is right here, and what it does is it goes all the way back to this top tentacle, it reverses down across the body up to this joint point, and the tail is also rigged as well. So I was really pleased with this. It really worked the way I wanted. I was really happy with it. And ultimately I think it looks really good. So this is the final monster. Now the other thing I did create was if I just quickly show our alien. We also have our alien, and this is the last thing I'm going to show because I'm worried about how long this video is going to be. But if I quickly go into what it looks like, you could change the different colors of these because they're different materials, and you can also see that it does have a rig. If I go into wireframe, simple rig, just the legs, little bit of a spine, head, a neck, and you have your arms that are individually rigged. The paint weights isn't great, but because I didn't spend that much time on them. However, I'm still pleased with how it ended up. So this has actually been a really good game jam. Overall, I want to show you as the last thing this is the game jam. So go and check it out. It's the Lame Jam 2. This is my submission. There will be a link to my itch.io, and you can, if you go to the Monstrous Descent, then you will be able to see a link for where it was submitted, as well as a little bit of details, and you can even download it yourself and play it. So if I go to submissions, you'll be able to go to the game jam and see it. Now we got a few comments here. We did get some good feedback. I was actually talking to these people in their Discord, because I usually talk to a lot of the people. A lot of these game jams have their own Discord, so I'm usually talking to them when I'm taking part. Had some good interactions with them and about their games. But I also took part in giving reviews to their games as well. But you also have a few reviews for me. So things like good atmosphere, the feeling of danger, a dangerous night chase is really good. People really enjoyed it. I'm glad that people actually had fun with it. And ultimately, I was very pleased with this game jam. I couldn't have asked for a more successful game jam as well, because there wasn't really too many bugs. I didn't really have too many issues, and I had a lot of fun creating a new idea, a new game that I'd not done before. So this was Monstrous Descent. You go and check it out when you get the chance. Subscribe, like, and this has been ProTaleDev, and I'll see you next time.